this point, every information portal is saturated with mindfulness content. But this show is a unique, unusual, curious take on mindfulness. Some of what you hear will be completely new to you. Let's dive in and take a look at the nature of the aware mind. I invite you to deepen your awareness so that you may be liberated and inspired.
We are here with Sarah Vallely, mindfulness teacher, coach, and author. Sarah has been teaching meditation and mindfulness for the past 2 decades, training and certifying others to teach mindfulness. Sarah is the author of 4 books. Her latest book is titled Tame, Soothe, Dwell, the 55 Teachings of TSD Mindfulness. Today on the Aware Mind podcast, we talk about some of the causes of procrastination being doubt, fear, trauma, and optimism. We talk about how procrastination could potentially be hereditary. And we also discuss a process for getting away from procrastination cycles. I am Jacob Durosset. We are here with Sarah Vallely. Sarah, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jacob. Thanks. A lot of this information I'm going to talk about here at the front end, I got from a published research article called Is Procrastination a Vulnerability Factor for Hypertension and Cardiovascular Disease? Testing on extension of the procrastination health model. That was published in the Journal of Behavioral Medicine. They talked about the top 5 lifestyle changes that we can make to better our health, determined by research. What do you think, Jacob? What do you think might be on that list?
Stress is obviously going to be a thing. Social connection, exercise, if I had to guess, diet, sleep.
Yeah, you hit most of them. So they say exercising regularly, eating healthy, reducing caffeine intake, getting sufficient sleep, and managing stress. That's interesting. Managing stress is one of the top 5 lifestyle changes that we can do to support us to have better health. This podcast is definitely about managing stress. They say that procrastination is associated with some acute health problems, with headaches, digestive issues, colds, and insomnia. I really get the digestive issues, but the colds, I thought that was interesting that those of us who procrastinate are more likely to get colds.
I have a question though. Did it say in the study if this was a corollary or causation?
I don't think this was causation. Most of this, I think this was correlation. Yeah.
I always wonder, so they used to do these studies with dementia patients and they thought that they all slept poorly because they had dementia. And then the sleep researcher went in and discovered actually because they slept poorly, they had way worse symptoms of dementia.
Yeah, I read that carefully because I'm always looking for that too. And they did use the word associate.
Gotcha,
it's associated, but there is also discussions about causation, about how this cycle of the procrastination causing stress, which actually causes issues with your immune system. So that would tie to the colds for sure.
I did read this very recent study that basically if somebody tells you that something is going to benefit you or deter you in some way, it will dramatically increase the effects of it.
You're saying that it's kind of in our minds, or?
I really probably shouldn't be quoting this study off the cuff, but the gist that I got from it is if I tell you, Sarah, that if you use a red ink pen instead of a blue ink pen, you'll lose more weight. From a neuroscience perspective, you will lose more weight because I told you that if you believe it. Yeah. So,
gotcha.
I love that study. I bring that up all the time to my clients because I tell them everything's going to make them lose weight.
Yeah.
Like, let's warm up. It will make you lose weight, everything.
I believe you. Yeah. And that's probably why when they write these articles, they're really careful about that they use the word associate or correlate because of some of that. But I think we can also look at some of this information and say, you know what? Yeah, there is some causation here. I get you. Yeah, for sure.
I'm excited to hear this.
Yeah. But they do say that one of the reasons that procrastination leads to these issues is it raises cortisol levels. Also super interesting, the research shows that procrastination is 46% hereditary. Can we do something about it if it's hereditary?
Yeah, I wonder that. Could that just not be nurture, though, that you grew up with a mother that procrastinated? So now you've taken on those habits? That'd be very tough to say. You'd have to take twins separated at birth. One, you know what I mean? That's fascinating.
It was a twin study.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was? Oh, my goodness.
It was a twin study. Yeah.
Fascinating. So obesity in the world is kind of not, we don't really understand why people get obese. Some people, if you give them a carrot and other people go carrot, one person will gain weight from the carrot, the other one won't. Basically, I'm minimizing the science right now. But yeah, so they did the same thing with twin study that obesity is hereditary, which, you could argue genes and whatever, but some people just have to work a lot harder to not be obese than people, which seems obvious, but I always tell people that to go easy on yourself. They also say that the people from a hereditary perspective are prone to be obese. Their lifestyle choices will reflect that as well. So they will have a more difficult time abstaining from things that increase their obesity than a person that doesn't. And that really blew my mind. I think that it's a real cringe situation in my industry when I see people saying things like, I got up at 5 a.m., ate raw liver, and you should too, and you'll look like me. And it's like, that's absolutely not true. Not in the least. Okay, sorry, I have derailed this completely.
You're good.
I am off the rails. I'll be quiet.
I do believe that we can overcome some of these challenges that are hereditary. I don't have as much of background in the physical challenges, but as far as behavioral and cognitive, I believe that that's one of the most powerful things about mindfulness is we can actually use mindfulness to override our DNA. Another interesting point here is when we are stressed for long periods of time, we perpetually activate our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And what happens when we activate this for extended period of time, we can suffer from anxiety and depression, mood swings, and irritability. And that in turn leads to compromising your immune system. So that's one of the connections. That's the cycle, right? We procrastinate, we cause some issues on this physical level with this axis, and that leads us to these moods. And then that in turn affects our physical immune system. This particular article is about hypertension and cardiovascular disease. So they're saying that this type of stress, specifically procrastination, is leading to hypertension and cardiovascular disease in certain people. That's a lot about the physical level, the physical consequences of procrastination. On a more behavioral and cognitive level, people who procrastinate often experience behavioral disengagement, which basically means giving up easily, especially giving up on exercise routines, healthy eating habits, meditation, some of those lifestyle health choices. People who procrastinate are often in denial. People who procrastinate often cope using substances. And the big one, they said the most dangerous behavioral and cognitive response to procrastination is self-blame, putting ourselves down because we're not doing something, and this fear of failure, which can be very stressful. That is affecting us on a physiological level. The experts say that this is the most serious cognitive behavioral response. So how do we use mindfulness to be less of a procrastinator?
I do have a question about procrastination, and you may be about to define this, but when you say procrastination, obviously I think that what comes to my mind is avoiding things, putting things off.
Procrastination is a form of avoidance. And from a Buddhist perspective, the Buddhist teachings explain that we need to walk that middle way in between craving and aversion, right? So this procrastination through the lens of Buddhism is that aversion. What are we averse to? What are we avoiding? And I just like to use that word procrastination because it's something that we all relate to, we use in our daily lives.
The Buddha basically deduced it down to, suffering is, grasping an aversion, right? You're pulling positive things towards you and pushing negative things away, right? I reckon the more you get lost in that, you're not going to be in the middle by definition because you're at the peaks the whole time. You're just bouncing back and forth. And to me, that just sounds like you would be very unstable. I've been there.
That's one of the things that the Buddhist teachings include is that suffering is a result of our cravings, giving into our cravings and our aversions. And when we are doing either of those, we are creating suffering for ourselves.
But I will say, if you don't have a foot to stand on with your attention, you will not know that you're doing that. I had no idea that I was in my early 20s, especially. I just avoided schoolwork because I didn't feel like I was good at it. So I avoided it. And then that caused so much pain at the end of the semester, just like, oh my God, what have I done? But the more that you are aware of your mind going down these alleys of grasping an aversion, the more you can come back.
It goes the other way too, that overextension and that overworking, being mindful of that. And so that's the big point that I want to drive home in this episode is being mindful of when you're in those cycles. When are you into that overextension, overworking? When are you into this avoidance? Our fourth episode was about being overworked and overextended. You can go check that out. In that episode, I explained what drives us to be overworked. That can be traced back to a sense of responsibility and or fear and or compulsion and or aspiration.
We performed an exorcism on me because I was very overworked and overwhelmed.
Yes, we did.
Which I kind of always am.
Yeah, that was a good one. But today we're talking about procrastination or aversion or avoidance, whatever term you want to use. And the driving forces there could be one or more of the following: doubt, fear, trauma, or optimism. And so the idea is to identify your patterns. So here are some of my patterns. I'm definitely in that realm of optimism. And that optimism could be fantasy. You're living in a fantasy. It could be risk taking. It could be being blind to something. So I definitely go into that fantasy, and the fantasy could be thinking that it's going to go away, whatever it is that I'm avoiding doing, thinking that it's just going to get solved on its own, or thinking that it's not needed. This being in this fantasy that this thing that I need to do is not really needed. But in the reality, it really is. So a real life example of this would be my bills. My bills just sit on the coffee table. I deep down have this fantasy that the bill situation is just going to get solved on its own. Like, it's ridiculous. I had to have a kind of come to Jesus session with myself one day and just sit with this. Like, yeah, this is a part of my thinking process. But I have to tell you that once it worked, once it worked, a few years ago, I didn't get a power bill for 3 months. And so it was kind of like the power bill sitting there, didn't really do anything about it. Didn't get any follow-up, didn't get any phone calls, didn't get any more bills. And 3 months later, I find out that they just randomly started sending my bill to some other guy across town. And I think he actually paid a month of it. So
really nice.
Yeah. So that's the issue here with me is I also have this little part. It's yeah, but sometimes it works. And then the other is risk taking, that I might just chance it. I avoid whatever it is because I might get a little rush out of the risk. Let me see what happens if I don't fix my refrigerator. This could be fun. That's not really workable. And also I blind myself, distract myself with other things. Like right now I need to be doing some taxes. I need to be putting together an annual report. I've been doing everything else under the sun other than those things.
For me, the fantasy aspect is where I'm spending my time is the best use of my time in that moment. One of the things that I was having an issue with was remembering to frequently empty out my cat's litter box because you don't really see it, doesn't smell. So there was no, reminders that I was getting. And I think I just kept telling myself one day I'm going to be able to afford a robot litter box, the one that cleans itself. And so I think I just got by on this fantasy for a couple of months. I would just, a couple of days go by, I hadn't scooped the litter box. And it's well, one day I'll make more money and I'll be able to afford a robot. It took me realizing, empathizing with the cat for a minute and being wow, that's really an unfortunate situation my cat's dealing with. It's waiting on me to make money. The blind thing too, risk taking, all of these, literally everything you said. I could come up with a million examples of these. My wife will say things like, oh, we need to do X. And I'm it'll probably be fine. And then she's like, I don't know why you live that cowboy lifestyle of just assuming things are going to work out in the end.
Yeah. And that's excellent that you're mindful of that process. You have seen that process within yourself, because otherwise you would probably be saying, oh, no, I never do that.
I think the pandemic helped a lot in that way, where I was home a lot more. I didn't have a lot of things distracting me early on in the pandemic. So I was able to really just examine my daily habits from I couldn't get away from it standpoint. Like I was kind of confronted with all of my little things that I had been telling myself because I'm so busy with work or because, social interactions are very important for your health. That means I need to go out frequently. All these things that I was telling myself that was like, no, you know what? I should probably dust more often, like that's not getting done.
Yeah. So that optimism that we've been talking about, that's only one of four of the driving forces in the way that I approach this subject. And so the others are trauma. So you could ask, is my avoidance about trauma? Am I avoiding this because I can't control it? Because those of us who've been through trauma, we want to sometimes control things because that gives us this sense of safety that we'll be safe from future trauma. Or am I in this avoidance because I think it will lead to pain? So those are some ways to identify cycles of procrastination due to past trauma. Or is the avoidance about fear? You might ask yourself, is my avoidance about fear? Do I fear if that going forward with this will disrupt my daily routine, might disrupt a relationship, might disrupt my finances? Do I fear I will experience emotional stress if I pursue this, or mental discomfort, or have an anxiety attack? And then the last one is about doubt. Am I skeptical about the process? So the process that I need to use to complete this task, am I just in general skeptical about that process? Does the process just not make sense? Do I doubt my own capabilities of following through with this? Do I doubt someone else's capabilities? So those are some questions you can ask to identify if your procrastination is driven by doubt. I think that there's some things that I avoid because I doubt the process. I'm avoiding certain business practices because I'm doubting the process.
I know logically I need to produce more content for YouTube. You have to really put yourself out there when you make a video. It has created a large avoidance. I'd say embarrassment is what I feel, or fear of being rejected by people. There's so many thoughts in your head about that kind of thing, and it causes me to avoid.
So it sounds like some of that is doubt, but some of it is fear.
Oh, yeah.
Identifying that there are some fears of experiencing certain emotions, fears of how you might be perceived. The explanation of how mindfulness can support us through this is, number one, being mindful in the moment that you are in the cycle. And so to do that, it helps to, before the moment, like now, is to start to explore what those driving forces are and some of the details of those driving forces, thinking about specific situations when your fear or your doubt or your optimism is driving you to be avoidant. Then it's easier when you're in the cycle to identify it because you've already done some exploring. So that's the huge part, is identifying that you're in the cycle in the moment. And then being truthful about your tendencies, say, yeah, this is what I'm doing. That was a big turning point for me when I realized I was procrastinating paying my bills because there was a part of me that believed if I didn't pay my bills, that it would go away, which is ridiculous, right? So I had to sit with myself and just accept that. So you've identified that you're in this cycle. You've just completely accepted that this is something that where you're at. And then sitting with yourself and using mindfulness and being curious, asking, how does this experience feel in my body? What's going on in my body right now when I'm in this pattern? What behaviors am I showing? What am I doing? What thoughts am I thinking? Using your mindfulness to really just see the whole moment, see the holistic experience. And also emotions. What emotions are resulting? And this is super important because the experts say that moving into those negative emotions of self-blame and all of that are dangerous to our mental health and our physical health. Noticing what kind of emotional place is this process, this cycle putting me in? Is it making me feel powerless? Am I feeling regret? Am I feeling trapped, disappointment? And you can use self-compassion practice to help ease some of those difficult emotions. Those are the steps that one can follow to use mindfulness to help them overcome some of these negative effects of procrastination.
So if you had to put this into a sentence or two sentences, like a blurb, what would your advice be?
Recognize when you're in a cycle of procrastination. Is this about optimism? Is this about trauma? Is this about fear? Or is this about doubt? Then noticing the consequences of that being in that cycle, especially those emotions. Like, what is that bringing me to? Is that bringing me to being self-critical? Is that bringing me to these feelings of disappointment? Because that's where you're going to have some negative effects, is really moving into those moods. And that's what the science shows. Catching that cycle and then using self-compassion and acceptance, sitting with it to help yourself move through it in a healthy way.
Take a moment to just sit and say, okay, why am I experiencing this? Where is this stemming from? It's okay that this is happening. I'm human. This is normal. So sit with it. And then what? Hop up and do the thing you've been avoiding.
That kind of goes outside the realm of mindfulness approach. Mindfulness approach is not about doing. Life is about doing. So yeah, at some point you got to go up there and do it. And I did with my situation. I'm better about paying my bills now, but we're talking about the mindfulness part. And the mindfulness part is sitting with it and honoring your process and honoring yourself and getting to a point where you realize, I deserve to feel peace. So in order to get that peace, I'm realizing that I need to maybe not be in this cycle as much. So it's an honoring, it's a real worthiness. Like I'm worthy of peace. And so it's better for me if I don't go into these cycles. And one of the ways we don't go into the cycles, is about actually doing the thing in some cases. Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction for people to hear too, about mindfulness is not about doing, life is about doing. That's a great quote from you. So often I subscribe a path to awakening, to enlightenment, to getting beyond making these mistakes. And so anytime that you regress, it feels bad, but then remembering that, oh yeah, wait, this is what the path is. The path is recognizing, going back. And so it's really important for me to realize, I guess, life is about doing and this practice is not. So it's okay. It's just about accepting. You will eventually do it. You don't have to use your mindfulness to hit yourself over the head when you don't and be like, oh, I got to do this now.
Yeah. And some people might think that avoidance is non-doing. It's actually not true. You're actually doing stuff to avoid. So you're doing things like distracting yourself with other things. You're doing things like telling yourself, I really should be doing this. I'm really kind of a crappy bookkeeper because I'm not doing this. That's a doing, right? So even though avoidance is a putting off, it's still a doing. And that's what we want to be aware of. It's wake up to all that doing that goes into procrastinating. It's exhausting. On the blog, I will post a document that goes into more detail about these driving forces of procrastination and avoidance: doubt, fear, trauma, and optimism.
The Aware Mind podcast is a TSD mindfulness production. Please visit our website at tsdmind.org. That is T as in tame, S as in soothe, and D as in dwell. Mind as in mindfulness.org. Check out our blog post for this episode with links to supplemental information such as worksheets you can use to put into practice the mindfulness skills shared in this episode. Also, please sign up for our newsletter and receive mindfulness tips. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at aware_mind_podcast.